Alpha Females, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Katie Freeman. Today's guest is Christine Trimpe, a transformative wellness leader dedicated to empowering women to reclaim their health and vitality through her faith-based holistic approach to weight loss. As the founder of the Sugar-Freed Me Method and a certified sugar licensed practitioner, Christine helps clients achieve lifelong healing from sugar addiction and food-related struggles. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with Christine. Hi, Christine. Thank you so much for coming on to the Alpha Female podcast today. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm very excited to be here with you today, Katie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I would love to launch into, learning more about you, and I want the listeners to learn more about you as well. Tell me about your background, how you got started.
Well, I think we connected because we both had something in common going through our college days in Greek life. And so I can look back and let's hop back to that time in my life, because when I went away to college, I didn't think I was like an unhealthy person or struggling with too much in my life. But as soon as I ended up on a college campus on my own, away from home, I can look back at that time, that season in my life, and see that is where I started stumbling a lot and started this path of my journey that I prefer I didn't have to live through. But going away to college is when I can look back and I can see that my health began to be impacted. And then hopping ahead about 30 years after graduating from college, getting marrying my college sweetheart, by the way, and getting married, having kids, establishing a home, very well established in my career as an accountant. I went on a 25th anniversary trip with my husband to Rocky Mountain National Park. And this is where my turning point moment started, because I love to share about this. On that vacation, my husband had planned some hikes in Rocky Mountain National Park, and we went to a trail marker to head up to Nymph Lake at the Bear Lake stop. For anybody that's been there, it's a great stop. And I looked at the trail marker and I said, half a mile, I could do a half mile. So I started up the trail with him, and I got up about halfway up that trail and my body said, no more. I was gasping for air. And I begged off, told my husband I just had to sit down. I gave him permission to go on without me. And he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, I'm positive." I just needed that time to myself, Katie, because I was, the reason I couldn't climb is because I was more than 100 pounds overweight. I was morbidly obese. The chronic health issues began piling up at that late 40s age of life. And as I sat on that stump at the age of 48, I started thinking about my future, or maybe my lack of my future, because I was wondering in that moment, was I going to live long enough to meet my grandchildren? I was very sad about letting my husband down again, not being able to join in on a fun activity. And so I realized at that time now that was my take ownership moment in my health journey, because I remember just saying a simple prayer. I just said, "God, I just want to feel better." I didn't ask for a miraculous weight loss, because at that time I had given up on losing the weight because I had done yo-yo dieting for 3 decades. But I really just wanted to feel better, and I knew something needed to change in my life. So I did come home from that Colorado trip, and I did take my health seriously. And so that was almost 10 years ago now, Katie. Wow. So I've been walking out this health journey for 10 years, and I'm sure we'll talk more about the steps that I went through. But that's a little bit of the background of my story of where I got to be in this current season of life now as someone who has left corporate America and has stepped into a leadership role as a founder of my own method, my own company, an author and a speaker, and all the fun things that we're going to talk about today.
That's an amazing way of marking time, right? It's like, this was the turning point.
Yes. I'm so grateful for that low moment in my life, because it really, truly did change my life.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we can ask for somebody to change their habits all we want, but if that person is not willing to change their ways, it's going to fall on deaf ears, and they have to get to that point, right, where they say enough's enough.
Right, exactly. And that's my challenge as an entrepreneur. That's my challenge, is reaching women that are at that point, and, putting my hand down, and just like what I feel like God did to me in that moment was he just reached down and picked me up from that pit. And, I see these women struggling, and I have a way to help them get out. And so they don't have to struggle as long as I do. But yes, we all need to move from that contemplative state to actually taking action, because nothing's going to change if we don't take that first step.
Right, exactly. And, I want to delve more into your journey. So you said you started out as an accountant and found yourself in this wellness space. So take us through that.
Yeah, if you would have told me this 10 years ago before we headed off on that trip, I would never have believed you for a minute, because I actually loved my career in accountancy. I was a corporate controller and worked in the same corporation for over 20 years. So I was very content there. And as I went on this health journey, the one thing I should say is that in my corporate career, I had a successful career. I raised my kids. I got them to all their sporting events. I felt like I was doing all the right things. But the one thing that was weighing on my heart for all those years was my health struggles. Like, here, I'm successful at all of this, but I couldn't get that one thing right. And so that's what I was struggling with. And so coming home from that trip, what happened is I knew I needed a no plan B, a plan of attack to take control of my health. And fortunately, my husband also did tell me that in the mountain elevation, my snoring actually got a lot worse there too. So he very nicely told me. And so I decided, and I committed to him, and I told him, I'm like, all right, the first thing I'm going to do when I get home is I'm going to fix my sleep. Because I had the hope that if I fixed my sleep, that I would start waking up more refreshed, because I was chronically exhausted day in and day out. So I did the thing I didn't want to do for at least 10 years. I put off a sleep study because I knew I would come home with a CPAP machine, but I have to share that was the best medical intervention. That was an amazing first step that I took to regaining control of my health, because I did begin waking up refreshed every single morning. And so with having more energy, I know now that I can look back and I see how, which I think is the hand of God over my journey, is just leading me step by step into the next best step and the next best step and the next best step, until I eventually ended up learning so much about how sugar and a diet high in carbohydrates was damaging my metabolism, or my metabolic health more specifically. And so just everything I learned step by step, gradually making these new habit changes, instilling new lifestyle behaviors, I ended up losing a little over 100 pounds, and I've been able to keep it off now for all of these years. And so that is, like you said, something about habits that is key to making a lifestyle change. And that's the thing that's been sustaining me for all these years, is setting those new habits.
Right, exactly. Having an accountability buddy also helps, in your husband and, I mean, a friend or a coworker or a, sibling, any of these options could also work. But, so then you must have at some point thought, I should go more broad with my message and get my message out. How did you find yourself in the more, mass distribution of your message?
It's an interesting story, because when you lose a massive amount of weight, people tend to notice that. And I was very kind of a little bit insecure about it, but I was very excited to also share what was happening to me, because it was something new that no nutritionist, no doctor, no hospital weight loss program that I'd been involved in over the years, they never talked to me about my insulin hormone, my blood sugar imbalances. So I'm learning all these new things. And as someone who was a chronic dieter, like all the people that came to me and said, what are you doing? We've all been stuck in that yo-yo dieting, that vicious cycle. So I was able to talk about how I was releasing some of the advice that I'd been given over the years, like everything in moderation. That doesn't work for someone like me, who also I am a confessed sugar addict, carbohydrate addict, food addict. All right. So I am in recovery from that. Everything in moderation doesn't work for people who have metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance or prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. You cannot consume sugar in a diet high in carbohydrates and expect to lose the weight or to feel healthy day to day. So letting go of all these things, of course, I was excited to share about it. And interestingly enough, I started sharing a lot on Twitter, or the X, it was Twitter then, the X community. And I got really engaged and involved in what you would call the low carb community or the keto community there. And also a lot of carnivore people are very active. We all have a passion for metabolic health because we've been able to ditch the old dietary dogmas and try something different that really worked for each of us. And there's so many people in that community finding success with their health and wellness, losing the weight, keeping it off, reversing so many chronic diseases. I reversed my prediabetes. I reversed fatty liver disease. I reversed my obstructive sleep apnea. I reversed pain and inflammation, chronic headaches, monthly migraines, so much. And not to mention the morbid obesity, right? That's in the past now too. So just being engaged in that community, really kind of the message started getting out there. And I had some journalists reach out to me. They wanted to share my story. And so I ended up, creating a website and putting together 21-day boot camps for women just like me to share how they could wrap their brain around quitting sugar and living a low carb lifestyle.
Right.
And just stepping into the same freedom that I've had. So now I have this passion for that, and did end up leaving my corporate career shortly after I built my website and started coaching and wrote a book. Now I have 2 books out, going on the speaking circuit, being interviewed on television news segments and things like that. So it was a natural progression that I actually was very excited to leave my corporate career. Not that I didn't appreciate that. I loved my job, like I said, but this is a whole new calling and my passion. I feel like it's my purpose in life, like what God created me to be. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And I feel like, when you're being called to a specific direction and you resist that, you're always going to think, what if? So I'm so glad that you took the leap and you leaned into your passion, your newfound passion about health and wellness. And, obviously it's worked out for you, you've got this wide reach.
Yeah. And I took the time to get certified as a Christian health and wellness coach. And I've also educated myself and gone through a program to be a sugar addiction specialist. So I learned a lot about myself in that. So that's why I can say I am a recovering sugar addict. And it started in my childhood. My dependency on sugar for a quick source of fuel and for coping and for covering up my emotions and the way I was feeling began pretty early in my life. So it is something that is very much worth investigating and, realizing how we got to this point. But I want to promise anybody listening thinking, oh my goodness, I could never live without sugar. You can. I'm living proof of it. My coaching clients are living proof of it. And when we see our food behaviors and our relationship with food and how we've been turning to food, and I often talk about how I was craving all the wrong things and I was filling all those holes and those nooks and crannies in my soul with junk food. And even though I was not what you would call like a binge eater, but still when I had emotional moments, I was turning to food. And then also sugar is highly addictive. So it's very hard to shut off that switch unless you're really aware and cognizant of what you're doing. But once you have the awareness, I always say when you know better, you do better. And so that's what I hope and encourage women to do. Just think about it. Think about
Yeah.
how often you turn to food. Think about how often you crash on the couch after a long day at work and you're numbing yourself with, like one of my favorite things to numb myself with would be like BritBox true crime television, right? Things like that. Or you're just snacking on junk food. And before you know it, you realize like, I just ate a half a bag of chips. What have I done? So we can bust those cycles. We can break free from that. And I just want to give anybody hope today that, especially if you're living with obesity or chronic health issues, I really encourage you to investigate and look in what sugar is doing to your way of life and how damaging it is.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that sugar addiction. I definitely think it's more of like a dopamine seeking type thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Because I have ADD, so I'm seeking dopamine any way I can get it.
Yes.
And it's a lot of times it's like, I need to just be more mindful of thinking, okay, why am I reaching for the chocolate?
Yes.
Yes. What could I be doing instead that's more productive and less damaging to my body?
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe we can, fuel this desire for dopamine into something more creative or productive, less destructive.
Exactly. Yeah. And when we learn to identify the cues, like something's cueing us and it's igniting that craving, it's driving that desire to reach for the chocolate or the potato chips. My sugar of choice was potato chips. Like I liked the savory sugars. When you eat potato chips, they break down into sugar immediately in your digestive tract. So as far as your body is concerned, a gallon of ice cream and potato chips are just as damaging to your blood sugar, your insulin hormone, all of that. So yes, so we need to learn these cues. And when you begin to identify these things, you can develop new habits. Like you said, find something different to do. So one of my favorite things to do instead would be to get outside and take my husky for a walk. He loves to go for walks. So just to have these different things in place that we can turn to instead of coping with food.
Yeah, exactly. Healthy coping mechanisms, getting outside, getting some vitamin D.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so obviously you spoke to how being in a healthy weight now has affected your life medically. What do you find how it's affected you, like lifestyle wise? What has changed?
Yeah, so I'm much more active, which is really amazing because for so many years I sat on the sidelines when my kids were doing activities. I can remember one time I took my daughter and her now husband, they were dating at the time. We went up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and they wanted to do this 8-mile hike. And I was like, there's no way I can hike 8 miles. So I brought a lawn chair. I dropped them off at point A. I drove to point B and I sat and read a book for like 3 hours or however long. I don't know if it was that long, but I sat there and waited for them. And at the time, my heart was just crushed because of that. I'm like, I can't believe that I'm sitting in a lawn chair and they are enjoying, creation and hiking along a riverbank and in the beautiful Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And just moments like that. I lived those types of moments for 30 years. And so just to be able to be active and to climb mountains now, like that mountain I couldn't climb in Colorado, went back and I climbed that. I definitely got back to that lake and celebrated that moment. And I've also done extreme hikes in Colorado. I climbed the Manitou Incline with my daughter, and that was amazing. Wow. We went on an 11-mile hike in Ireland, which was my bucket list trip and I gift to myself after I got to a healthy weight. We went to Ireland for 3 weeks. We found a mountain in Ireland, believe it or not, 11-mile round trip hike up a mountain and just doing things like that. And not to mention being emotionally grounded and, not letting my emotions drive my food behaviors. Right. And also living a sugar-free lifestyle helps stabilize your mood too. Like I'm no longer, my kids used to call me Krabby Patty. And I don't blame them for that because I could look back. I was a crabby person because I was chronically exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard not to be crabby when you're chronically exhausted. And when I ditched sugar, I realized that the brain fog left pretty quickly. And then I realized that I had been living with that brain fog for so many years. So to not live in that brain fog and to have this clarity of mind and just also like joy is my thing. I have this new joy in my life. And when you have that joy, you can't keep it to yourself. It has to overflow. You have to share it with people. So those are all kind of the things that have changed in my life.
That's amazing. I love that you speak to the Joe overflows now.
Yeah.
You know, you have your cup is so full.
Yes.
It is now overflowing.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I feel like everybody wants to get to that point in their, happiness and their well-being and their health, So you spoke to eliminating, sugar and some carbs. So what are some things that women can start doing that would help them get them on the right track and get to a similar point where how you got yourself to?
Yes. Well, if they're a geek about science like I am, they could go down some rabbit holes just by Googling how sugar drives disease and, educating themselves like that. But just some practical tips that I love to share is the one way to clean up what we're putting in our mouth is by shopping just the perimeter of the grocery store. That's where you're going to find your whole foods that don't need ingredient labels, that don't have added sugars, like your meats and your poultry and your fish and your eggs and your dairy and your produce. You do have to skip the bakery section though. They typically have the bakery section on the perimeter as well too. So you kind of have to cut that corner and don't look over that way. But yes,
put your shield on.
Yes. And so one of the very first things I want my coaching clients to do also is to begin reading labels because, well, it might not be a surprise to many people, but once you really start looking at labels, you will be shocked at the amount of sugar that is in every type of ingredient. Any type of factory processed foods is most likely going to have added sugars. Now, I do find some clean items. Like, for example, I love taco salsa, and I can find a clean ingredient salsa at Trader Joe's, for example. They don't add sugar to their salsa. Okay. And that's amazing because just a normal grocery store brand of salsa typically will have added sugar. Now, there's going to be a little bit of sugar in salsa because of the natural sugar in tomatoes and the green peppers and the onions, just a little bit, just a small amount of carbohydrates in that salsa that I enjoy. But reading labels, shopping the perimeter, building your menus off of those tips can really help clean up your diet. And before you know it, you're going to have less pain, less inflammation. You're going to be able to quiet those sugar cravings. And if you need to lose weight, you're going to be able to start moving from being a sugar burner because you're not ingesting a lot of sugar all day long and moving into being a fat burner. And that's really where, the weight loss comes from, is when we switch from being a sugar burner to being a fat burner.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for the, introductory tips on how you can even just get started.
Right.
It's interesting because, I think in America, the sugar is everywhere.
Yes.
Everywhere. And I also went to Ireland recently on a family vacation and I was surprised at the lack of sugar in the food. And I was like, this, I would eat just a random bit of food. And I'm like, normally this might be a little bit more sweet, but I appreciate the fact that it's lacking sweetness.
Yeah.
I feel like this is how it should be.
Right. Exactly. I was a little bit nervous when I went to Ireland because I was I was at my healthy weight. I was so excited. I was like, what's this going to look like? But, I found in Ireland, everything was like farm fresh to table or from the boat, the seafood to, I remember looking at menus and they would identify who the fisherman was that brought in the fish. I was
or the farm.
So cool. Or the food, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
It was so cool.
Like we work with O'Connell Farm down the road.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I could live here.
Yes. Yes. I love that they're so very transparent about the sourcing of the food.
Yeah.
And everything was so fresh and felt like I was eating cleaner than in America. So, if you're an American listener, that is definitely an added hurdle.
Yes.
That needs to be a focus when you're shopping at the grocery store.
Right.
So, you spoke to a lot of your methods and, how you got started. And I just wanted to take a moment to ask you, so, the wellness space is pretty large, right?
Yes.
So what does it look like for you to show up as an alpha female in that space?
Right. It is very saturated space, right? The diet industry is a big billions of dollar industry. But I think that my type of leadership is a little unique, a lot unique, because I do intertwine faith, a huge amount of faith into my coaching. I have 5 pillars of the sugar-free method, and it's food, fasting, feelings, fitness, and it's all grounded by faith. So that's a little bit of my uniqueness. Is I do specifically help Christian women who are just like me. For many years, I tried to control everything about my weight journeys in my own power. I would count the points, I would count the calories, I would do all the things. I never thought to dig a little bit deeper to the root of my issues. That was these cravings that I was having that were out of control. And it really was a heart issue. So this is how my alpha female leaderships comes into play, is to invite women to look at the heart of the matter and to show up wholeheartedly for what is it that like there's a niggling on your spirit that something needs to change in your life. Let's dig at the root of it and try to figure out why we are turning to food and sugar and carbohydrates, besides the fact that they're highly addictive and it's hard to shut off that switch. It can be done. And then when we get to the heart of the matter, really, that's where the women can step into the freedom, using those 5 pillars and just stepping into the freedom. And that's what the freed is in the sugar-free method, right? It's the weight loss is wonderful. The weight loss is amazing. But living in freedom and having the weight of constantly thinking about food and having this food noise or food chatter always in your mind, quieting that down and stepping into what might be called food serenity is such a beautiful place to be.
I love that. Food serenity. Yeah. I mean, that sounds incredible. I want that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking me through, your background and sharing your tips. I would love to have you share any upcoming appearances or books. I want to hear about all of it.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for asking, because I actually, besides my sugar-free method coaching, I just released a book called Sugar-Freed: Stop Losing the Weight Loss Battle, Start Gaining the Victory. And it has been my life's work. It took 7 years to get this book into print and out into the world. So I would love if anybody listening would take a look at the book and see if it's a great fit for you. You can find out about it on Amazon by by going on Amazon, searching for my name and Sugar-Freed. But I also have a whole webpage on my website specifically dedicated to the book so that you can learn more about it. And then also you can find out about my Sugar-Freed coaching on my website. Invite me to speak. If you have an event coming up, I'm a speaker. I would love to come and talk to your organization or your women's ministry event. And I am all over social media by my name, so you can find me and connect with me there. I would love to connect with your listeners, Katie.
Great. Yes. And I'll be sure to link all of the relevant links to your websites, your coaching, your books.
And what I do have a free chapter excerpt of my book that's available. I'm pretty sure you have the link for that, or I'll get you the link.
Amazing.
But there's a chapter called Craving All the Wrong Things. And I thought it was a great chapter to just give a sneak peek inside the book. And you can download that from my website as well. If you go to christinetrimpe.com /sugar-freed, you'll see right at the top of the page, it says start with a sample chapter.
Amazing.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. I loved our conversation today.
Me too.
I hope the listeners get a lot out of our conversation and are able to contact you and get in touch. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me, Katie.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Christine. If you'd like to get in touch with her, I've included her contact information in the show notes. And if you liked this episode, please rate the show 5 stars wherever you listen and be sure to subscribe. Until next time, Alpha Females, take care.